Hello friends, my name is Dr. Harkirat Kulku. I'm your faculty for today's session. Today we are talking about human anatomy and physiology. What is anatomy? Anatomy is a branch of science which deals with the study of structure, shape and size of the organs and the bones. Whereas physiology is a branch of science which deals with the normal function of visceral system in the human body. While pathology is a branch of science which deals with the study of abnormal functions, disease process, etc. First, we will start with the anatomy. In anatomy, the first basic thing is the skeletal system, which makes a structure of the body. Skeletal system. Skeletal system has a very big comprehensive subject. Now, what is skeleton? Skeleton means the baseline structure on which the entire body is based on. Broadly, skeleton is divided into two sections, axial and appendicular. Axial means which forms the core of the skeleton, the center of the skeleton, whereas appendicular, which forms the appendages, that means the extremities, the limbs. Now we will talk about the axial system first. Axial system comprises of skull and the spine. Skull has 22 bones, 8 cranials and 14 facial bones. Whereas spine has 33 individual irregular shaped bones called vertebra, which are arranged in column. That's why it is known as spinal column or vertebral column. The vertebral column is again divided into 4 sections. The first, the cervical, which has 7 bones, 7 vertebrae. Then comes the thoracic, the chest part. It has 12 thoracic vertebrae. Third comes the lumbar, means your back. It has 5 lumbar vertebrae. Then comes sacral. Sacral is the base of the body. There are 5 sacral vertebrae which are fused into one. And at last, 4 rudimentary bones known as coccyx. Other name for coccyx is the tailbone. Now the thorax forms the bony cage known as thoracic cavity. It protects the vital organs like heart and lungs. Now we'll talk about the appendicular system, the limbs, the extremities. Appendicular system is broadly divided into upper and lower extremities. The upper extremities comprises of shoulder, also known as pectoral girdle, which comprises collarbone or the clavicle, and scapula, the shoulder blade, which is on your back side of the chest. The upper arm is formed of humerus, which connects to lower arm with the elbow joint. Now the lower arm has 2 bones, one on the lateral side, one on the medial side. Lateral Radius is placed on the lateral side of the lower arm, means in line with the thumb bone. And ulna, which is on the medial side, is in line with the little finger. After lower limb, lower arm is the wrist and the palm. Wrist is made up of carpals, small bony structures known as carpals, and connects to the palm, which is made up of metacarpals. Now the lower limbs. Lower limbs, like the upper limb, has a pelvic girdle, the hip bone, which connects to the lower extremities. Lower extremities is consisting of two things: the hip bone as well as the hip bone in total divided into three bones: ilium, ischium, and pubis, which forms the plate of the hip bone. The lower extremity is made up of femur, the thigh bone, and the tibia, shin bone. Then comes ankle, which are made up of small cuboid bones known as tarsals, which connects to the foot, which is made up of metatarsals. The shin bone, tibia, is supported with a thin bone on the lateral side known as fibula. This was the skeleton. The skeleton is supported by the muscle structure on it, which we call the muscular system. Muscular system is a group of various types of muscles that connects the bone to form a functional muscular system, which works as an anchor of the skeleton, which facilitates movements and posture. Broadly, muscles are divided into three categories. When we are talking about the muscular system, we are talking about three types of muscular tissue. First, the voluntary. Voluntary muscles are made up of striated muscles, which works as contraction under our control, means the control of the central nervous system. These are responsible for various movements. Whatever movements we do is done by these striated muscles. Then comes involuntary type of muscles, which are smooth muscles, non-striated type, which work or contract without our control. These are responsible for formation of the inner lining of the organs. Third comes a special type of muscle, cardiac muscle. These are again involuntary muscles, only found in heart, which is under control of autonomic nervous system, that has completely separate system of nerve conductions. Now we have spoken about the skeleton. Now we have spoken about the muscles also. Now we will be talking about the movements and the joints. There are various types of joints in the body: hinge joint, pivot joint, shoulder joint, ball and socket joint. Lots of joints are there, and lot of combinations for the movements, like flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, supination, pronation, circumduction, inversion, eversion. There are lot of movement types, and again it will be further extended to combination of movements. Now these are the basic things, basic movements like flexion. Flexion is bending towards the proximal segment, which reduces the angle between the proximal and the distal bones. Extension, opposite of that, straightening of the joint, where the angle between the proximal and distal end increases. Adduction. Adduction means to reduce sideways movement from the midline. Opposite to that is adduction. Abduction is inward towards the midline. Supination. Supination means turning your palm which faces towards your face, which faces the upward. Means your palm is facing upward. That is supination. Means you are taking something. Opposite to that is pronation. Means giving out. When your palm turns downwards. Then comes circumduction. It's a combination of supination, pronation, extension, and flexion. It's a rotatory movement of a shoulder to turn the palm upside down like a cricketer bowling. That action is circumduction. Inversion. Inversion is turning towards the midline. Say for an example, if you are standing, your foot are at the sole. Your foot turns towards inside, means inversion. When the foot turns outside the midline, away from the midline, is known as eversion. We have spoken about the anatomy part of the bone, the structure, the skeleton part. Now we'll talk about cardiovascular system. It's an anatomical as well as physiological part. Cardiovascular system is a complex system which comprises of heart and vast network of blood vessels. Heart is a muscular structure generally known as pump house of our body, which has two halves, right side and the left side. Is divided into two sections, the upper half and the lower half. Upper half of the heart is known as atrium and lower half of the heart is known as ventricles. When we talk about the sides, we can say right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. The right atrium receives the deoxygenated, so-called impure blood from the body, and right ventricle then pumps out that blood to the lungs. This right atrium and right ventricle is guarded by a gate valve, that is the tricuspid valve. Now, once the blood is pumped to the lungs, it gets oxygenated. This particular circulation is known as pulmonary circulation, from where heart is pumping out to the blood to the lungs for oxygenation and returning back to heart. This is pulmonary circulation. Then after oxygenation, after the gases exchange takes place in the lungs, blood is returned to the ventricle. Now it comes to Left ventricle. Left ventricle receives the blood from the lungs, passes it to left ventricle through again a gate wall, bicuspid. Now this left ventricle is the main pump house which supplies the blood to the body. When the arteries, and when we talk about arteries and veins and capillaries, venules, so arteries are the vessels which takes blood away from the heart, and veins which brings back the blood to the heart. Right? Then comes, when we talk about the circulation, there are two types of pumping out actions. One is pumping out and one is pumping in. The pressure exerted highest during the contraction, whether it is a atrial pumping out, whether it is a ventricular pumping out, is known as systolic pressure. When the pressure drops to the lower during relaxation or filling up of a chamber, whether it is atrium, whether it is ventricle, is known as diastolic pressure. The normal blood pressure of a human body is 120 by 80 millimeters of mercury. Blood pressure is checked by an instrument, sphygmomanometer. Now the second circulation, this is very important, lymphatic system. Blood is pumped out from the heart to the body, and the blood is carried with arteries, then distinct to arterioles. Then it returns to venules, veins, and come back again to heart. But some of the fluid part escapes the capillaries into the surrounding tissue. After cellular exchange, that fluid returns back to blood supply, but it cannot enter the circulatory system, the capillaries. It is drained out through a special type of channels known as lymphatic channels. This drains into the right atrium. This lymphatic system has various nodes and glands. What are nodes? Small collection of lymphatic tissue. And glands are the bigger form of those nodes, like tonsils, adenoids, thymus, etc. These lymph nodes, these lymph glands, not only filter the toxic material, also produces lymphocytes, which fights the infection, any foreign body. Then comes the respiratory system, the breathing system. Respiratory system is a complex structure comprising of airway tubes, air sacs, and capillary of blood supplies. The respiratory system is broadly divided into two sections or tracts: the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract comprises of nose, pharynx, larynx, which basically are located outside the chest cavity. The lower respiratory tract, the trachea, bronchus, lungs, bronchial tree, air sacs, the alveoli are inside the thoracic cavity, in the chest cavity. Now there are two lungs on each side, one on each side, right lung and left lung. Right lung is divided into three lobes: superior lobe, middle lobe, and inferior lobe. Whereas left lung has only two lobes, the superior and the inferior. Just because to increase the room for heart is towards the left side, half of the heart is towards the left side. To give a room, there are two lobes of left lung. The gaseous exchange happens in the terminal end of the bronchioles at air sacs, small air sac structures called alveoli. Now, the respiratory system has various functions to play, like pulmonary ventilation, external respiration, internal respiration, transportation of gases, gas exchange, and homeostatic control of the respiration. Pulmonary ventilation is a process where the air flows in and out of the lungs, whereas the external respiration is a process that allows the gases exchange to happen between the alveoli and blood running around the surrounding capillaries. Internal respiration is a gaseous exchange between the circulating blood and the tissue. Now comes the gastrointestinal system, GI system. GI system, or the alimentary canal, is a long tube which includes various organs in a group to function together as a system. It is responsible for converting the food into energy, absorbing the nutrients and minerals from the food. GI tract consists of oral cavity, which generally we speak as mouth, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and the large intestine. The oral cavity of the GI tract includes teeth, tongue, salivary glands, whereas the inner side of the body has liver, gallbladder, pancreas. These are the glands, organs, viscera, which are responsible for various functions. The food, what we eat, is chewed in the mouth, mixed with saliva, and swallowed into esophagus. The lumen of this esophagus is lined with multiple layers of muscles, which helps to propel the food to stomach and further, like a wave pattern known as peristalsis. The stomach is a J-shaped sac with two openings. One is the proximal opening, which is also known as cardiac opening or cardiac orifice, and the distal opening, which is known as pyloric orifice. The esophagus and duodenal end are responsible for intake and expelling out the food from the stomach. The chewed food enters the stomach through gastric orifice or the cardiac orifice and gets mixed with the gastric juices like hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. Then this food is digested, and the semi-digested food again passes to the pyloric through the pyloric office to the small intestine, where most of the absorption takes place. Once the food passes to small small intestine starts its role of further digestion as well as absorption. Small intestine has three basic sections: the duodenum, which is immediately connected to the stomach, then the jejunum, which is the longest part of small intestine, and the ileum, which connects to large intestine. The duodenum is responsible to neutralize the acidic content of the chyme. What was chyme? The chewed food which enters the stomach mixed with the gastric acids is chyme. Then initiates further digestion in the duodenum. Once the food crosses duodenum, goes into jejunum, the absorption starts taking place. Jejunum as well as ileum, both are highly coiled structures. Then comes very important organ, the pancreas, which produces various enzymes like lipase, peptidase, amylase, which are responsible to digest fat, protein, and carbohydrates. At the distal end of gastrointestinal tract is the large intestine, which is mainly responsible of absorption of water content from the digested food and to store the fecal matter. Now comes very important system. In fact, all the systems are very important. Excretory system has its own relevance. Human body excretes out the toxic waste from the blood through a sophisticated group of organs like kidney, ureter, urinary bladder, urethra, which combines together to function as an excretory system. Kidney is a bean-shaped structure which is placed on the either side of the vertebral column at the area of renal angle. Each kidney has 1 million excretory units known as nephrons. Nephrons are responsible of excreting out or filtering out of the nitrogenous waste, salt, excess water from the blood. Once the kidney filters the excreta, it is passed to the ureters. Through the ureter, the waste in the form of urine descends to the storage sac, the urinary bladder. Once the storage is full, the urinary bladder gives a signal for micturition, and the sphincter in the bladder initiates to release the urine out through the urethra. How does it happen? How the filtration happens? I already said there are excretory units, nephrons, which has a glomerulus nest of filtration plant. Each nephron is supplied by small arterioles known as the entering artery, which enters the nephron is known as efferent artery, whereas the artery which comes back from the nephron is known as efferent arteries. This makes the urine production faster and efficient. Now comes to the control. The entire body is controlled by the nervous system. Nervous system is broadly divided into two categories: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system. First we talk about the brain. Brain is the central core of the central nervous system and also regulates the peripheral nervous system. It's located in the skull, means the head of a human body or an animal. Brain has broadly three parts: cerebellum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. The largest part of the brain is cerebrum, also known as cerebral cortex, which comprises right and left hemispheres. Both the hemispheres have different lobes. Cerebrum is responsible of various higher functions like interpreting the touch sense, vision, hearing, speech, reasoning, emotions, learning, cognitive developments, fine control of movements. Brain ventricles and the spinal cord is filled up with a fluid known as cerebrospinal fluid. It's a very complex function process. The different lobes in both the hemispheres. Brain has various lobes like frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal. Each lobe is significant for their own significant functions. Parietal lobe associated with movement, orientation, recognition, perceptions of any stimulus. Occipital lobe is associated with visual processing, memories, etc. Temporal lobe is associated with perception and recognition of auditory stimuli, memory, and speech. Cerebellum is responsible for balance and movement. Brainstem manages the autonomic functions like heart rate, breathing, these which you are not able to control yourself. Then comes the gland inside the brain, the pituitary gland. The master gland which controls entire body directly or indirectly, influencing or directly functioning. Pituitary gland is responsible for emotions like happiness, sadness, sleep, joy. Overall, if we say rejuvenation, then comes the spinal cord, which is connected to the brain. Spinal cord is long, thin, tubular bundle of nerve tissue and supported cells that extends from medulla oblongata to the lumbar region. What is medulla oblongata? It's a root of brainstem. Brain and spinal cord together forms the central nervous system. Spinal cord has three major functions: receiving the motor stimulus, any information from the external stimuli is received by the motor nervous system. Then conducting the sensory information from the brain to the target cell, to the external, in reaction to the external stimulus. Third, coordination between the reflexes. Spinal cord is a complex structure comprising of 31 spinal nerves. Now these nerves are in pairs. According to the section, we spoke about the vertebral column. So same way we are talking about the spinal nerves. 8 pair of cervical nerves, which are in the cervical region. 12 pairs of thoracic nerves, which are in the region of thoracic, the chest cavity. 5 pairs of lumbar nerves. 5 pairs of sacral nerve. And 1 coccygeal nerve. These together work for various sections of the body. Cervical region, cervical nerves are responsible for all the part which are up to the shoulder, head to shoulder. Then comes the thoracic nerves. Thoracic nerves complete chest area, the thoracic area, little bit lower to the abdominal area. Lumbar works for the pelvic and abdominal region and lower extremities. Lumbar, the lower part of lumbar region, the nerves work for the lower extremities. Next comes the endocrine system. What is endocrine system? As a group of glands which directly or indirectly influences the body function by secreting hormones. Major endocrine glands in the human body is hypothalamus, pituitary, pineal gland, which are located in the brain. These release endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, melatonin. These are mainly responsible for regulating the emotions and the sleep patterns. Then comes the thyroid and parathyroid glands, which regulates the metabolism. Next comes the adrenal gland, which is located on top of the kidney as an ad hoc, which is responsible for regulating heart rate, regulating your respiratory rate, regulating your blood pressure. Then comes pancreas, very important gland, which releases insulin and cortisol, which manage the glucose level in the blood. Finally comes the gonads, the sex glands, like testes and ovaries, which release male and female sex hormones. Now, the sensory organs. There are various types of sensory organs. Various senses are there, like sight, hearing, smell, touch, taste. So first we will talk about the sight, the eye. Eye is highly developed sensory organ which is responsible for analyzing the light stimulus and which makes us unable to see the things. The light stimulus is converted to the electrical impulses which are analyzed by the brain and we are able to see. Eye is composed of three layers: the outer, middle and the inner layer. The outer layer consists of sclera and cornea. The middle layer consists of choroid, ciliary and iris. Whereas inner layer consists of retina. Sclera is the outer layer which is white in color, responsible for overall protection of the eye. Sclera also provides an attachment to extraocular muscles which are actually responsible for the movement of the eyeball. In front of the eyeball, there is a transparent layer known as cornea through which the light enters the eye. The inner layer of the eye is filled with a viscous fluid known as aqueous humor. This is just behind the cornea. There is a pigmented disc supplied with muscles and blood capillaries known as choroid. The choroid has a small slit in the center known as pupil through which light falls into the lens. The lens is regulated by the attached muscles on the periphery of the lens which focus the light on the retina. Behind the lens, there is a chamber filled with transparent gel-like fluid known as vitreous humor. This gives the shape to the eyeball. The focused light falls on highly sensitive layer of photoreceptors known as retina, which we generally call the screen. Now comes the hearing, the ear. Humans have their ears on the side of head. Ears are responsible for hearing and balancing both. The external ear is made up of the fleshy part known as pinna, the ear lobe. Pinna connects the middle ear through a funnel-shaped ear canal known as external acoustic meatus. The middle ear comprises of eardrum and three tiny bones, malleus, incus and stapes. These tiny bones are responsible of conducting the auditory stimulus and passing it to the brain after conversion into electrical impulses. The middle ear is also connected to the pharynx through a small tube known as Eustachian tube. The inner layer has a snail-shaped circular canals which is responsible for equilibrium. It's known as cochlea. Then comes the third sense organ, the nose. The shape of the nose is defined by nasal bones and cartilages. The sense of smell is a chemical sense which is detected by the various chemoreceptors inside the nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is lined with the small hair called cilia, which is responsible for protecting any foreign material to go inside. The nasal cavity is surrounded by sac-like structure known as sinuses, the frontal, ethmoid, and maxillary. Then comes about the taste. Taste is done by the tongue. In other words, tongue is an organ for taste. Tongue is lined with the taste buds on the surface, which are receptors and located throughout the tongue. Condensed, sides, center, on the back of the tongue. The taste buds can identify 4 basic tastes like salt, sweet, bitter, and sour. The specific taste are taken by the specific receptors located in particular regions of the tongue. Say for an example, tip of the tongue is responsible for sweet. Back of the tongue is responsible for bitter. Sides of the tongue is responsible for salt and sour taste. Then comes the 5th sensory organ, the skin. Again, it's very important. Skin, the dermis, is the outermost layer or outermost covering of the body, generally responsible for protection, sensation, and temperature regulation. Skin is divided into 3 layers. The outer, known as epidermis, the middle, known as dermis, and the inner, known as hypodermis. All 3 layers have their own specific functions. Epidermis is waterproof, whereas dermis is full of hair follicles and sweat glands. Hypodermis is a good insulator. Then we come to reproductive system. Reproductive system, the genital systems, is a group of 6 organs responsible for sexual reproduction, broadly divided into male and female reproductive systems. Male reproductive system comprises of testes, spermatic ducts, sex glands, and the penis. Testes are lodged in a sac, the scrotum, in the pubic region near the perineum. Testes are responsible for sperm production as well as the male hormone testosterone. The second part, which is immediately connected to the testes through epididymis, a tube, the seminal vesicles, small sac-like structures which produces and stores the semen. Then comes the ejaculatory duct. The duct difference passes through the prostate and the semen into the urethra. Ductus deferens connects the vesicles, seminal vesicles, to urethra. During the ejaculation, the ejaculatory duct opens and expels the semen and sperm from the seminal vesicle to urethra. Now, what is urethra? Urethra is 8 to 10 inches long muscular tube present inside the penis, which is connected from the urinary bladder to the glands, the tip of the penis. The prostate. It's a walnut-shaped organ in the base of urinary bladder, which is exocrine in nature. Means it also produces some hormones. Prostate is located at the base of urinary bladder and envelopes the urethra, proximal end of urethra. Penis, the male external sexual organ located in the pelvis, above the scrotum. It consists of large pockets of erectile tissue, which, when filled with the blood, becomes erect. Penis is responsible for injecting the semen into vagina during the coitus. Now, what is semen? Semen is composition of fluid produced by the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland, and the sperm. It's a full combination of all these three. Now, what is the physiology for male reproductive system? Basically, there are two aspects. One is the spermatogenesis, means a process of producing sperm in the testes, and epididymis. What is epididymis? It's a coil-like structure connected to the testes and at the one end, and connects the seminal vesicle in the distal end. Spermatogenesis occurs when the luteinizing hormone, the LH, and the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, are produced. This LH and FSH becomes more prominent during the puberty. LH triggers the production of testosterone by the testes, whereas FSH triggers the maturation of the sperm cells, the spermatozoa. After production of spermatozoa from the testes, it enters epididymis and gets matured before it is stored in the seminal vesicle. Now, the ejaculation, the fertilization. Ejaculation is a process of interaction of sperm and oocyte, the female egg. The male spermatozoa combines with the oocyte to produce a zygote. It's known as fertilization. Now comes the female reproductive system. Female reproductive system is a group of female sex organs such as ovaries, uterus, and fallopian tubes. What are ovaries? Ovaries are the glands. These are small glands, size of an almond, located on both sides in the pelvic cavity besides the uterus. Ovaries are responsible for producing the sex hormones, female sex hormones, the estrogen and the progesterone, as well as egg, the ova. The egg ova is produced by oocyte in the ovary after the female reaches the puberty. Ova, once matured, is released. Matured ova is collected by the fallopian tubes and travels to uterus. Fallopian tube. It's a pair of muscular tubes which extends from the lateral sides of the uterus, whose distal end is funnel shaped, which collects the ova on release. The uterus is a muscular pear-shaped organ located in the pelvis, posterior to urinary bladder. Uterus is connected to the fallopian tubes on both sides. Uterus opens into vaginal vault through an opening known as cervix. Now, vagina. It's an elastic muscular tube which connects the cervix to the external os, the opening. Now, what is the physiology of female reproductive system? It has various stages. First comes the reproductive cycle, the process of producing ovum, the ova, and simultaneously preparing the uterus, the endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus, to receive the fertilized ovum. Then fertilization. Once the mature ovum is released, is taken up by the finger-like shapes known as fimbriae of the fallopian tube. It takes 1 week for a sperm to get fertilized with egg and to form a zygote. Once the zygote is formed, it passes to endometrium, where it is planted. If this ovum doesn't get fertilized, it reaches the uterus, but is being shed off as menstruation. Now, if the zygote is implanted, the fertilized zygote is implanted in the endometrium, in the uterus, starts growing up. Simultaneously, the female sex hormones, especially the prolactin and estrogen, starts developing the mammary glands and production of milk. The release of milk, the lactation, starts before the birth of a child and is completely controlled under prolactin. We have covered anatomy and physiology, the basic idea for all. Thank you for watching for this. If you have any queries, you can please put a query. we will answer you back. Thank you.